Here in the quick menu, we're going to take a look at some controls that are quickly accessed with the Q button on the back of the camera. Now, back when I was a small child, we didn't have quick menus. We just had a full menu we had to go to. And eventually those menus got so big that it was hard to find stuff. And so manufacturers like Canon put on a quick menu so that you could get to those few features, that dozen features or so, that you're going to need on a regular basis. And so that's what the idea is with the quick menu, is that it is steady, it's constant, there's no customization of this. These features are always there. A lot of them are ones that we've already talked about. But maybe you're going to reprogram one of the buttons on the camera, and now that feature is no longer there. You can always find the important things right in the quick menu. So let's dive in and take a look at what we have here. So along the top, we have our exposure mode, and that is essentially where you have the mode button on the camera programmed. You can't really change it here, but you can see where your camera is set to. And then we have our exposure controls. We talked about this back in section 3. And you can come in here and you can easily see on the back of the camera where your shutter speeds are. And so this can make for very easy adjustment when your camera is on a tripod or it's mounted up high and you can't see in the top or you can't see through the viewfinder itself. We've talked about exposure compensation back in section 3. Overexpose and underexpose when you're in a semi-automated program like program, time value, or aperture value. You can also do bracketing in here as well. We talked about flash exposure bracketing. This is part of the multifunction button on the front of the camera, but that's one of the items that I think is very high up on the list of potentially replacement items. Replacing that in the multifunction, which means you're going to need to look for that someplace else if you need to access it, and it's very easy to get here in the quick menu. Now, I did mention custom controls a number of times in this class, and I probably will continue to talk about it. Normally, you would dive into the full menu in order to get to it, but here you can do it as well. And so it's a nice shortcut when you do want to customize the buttons and dials on the camera. So there are a lot of different buttons that you can customize according to your needs. And this is something that you're really going to need to take some time to figure out what works best for you. And I just want to show you another customization mode. I'm going to show you a lot in this class, but I'm going to show you another one that I think some people might really like. Okay, so one of the problems with a camera like this is that as you're holding the camera with your right hand, you have access to a lot of your controls. But every time you want to go to the menu, you got to come all the way over here and then cross back in front of here, and that turns the screen on and off. And wouldn't it be nice if there was a menu button over here? Well, let's make it so. All right, so let's go to our screen right here. If you press Q, it's a little bit easier to navigate with this screen, kind of diverting from my point here, but if you have it here and you press Q, you'll get the same controls over there on the side, but I often prefer it when we are on this screen and then we hit the Q menu, then we kind of get this regular screen of information. And we're going to go over here to the customize buttons, and we're going to do dials or buttons. We're going to choose buttons, and we're going to go back and we're going to reprogram this set button down here. And so we're going to look for the set button, which is right here. We reprogrammed it to something else in a different portion of this class. We're going to go in and press set, and now we're going to look for the menu. And there it is over on the right-hand side. So I'm going to set menu over here. Hit menu to back out of here. And so now when I press the set button, I dive into the menu. And if you do a lot of menu diving, this is going to be great because now you don't have to come all the way over to this other side of the camera to hit the menu, because that's a really long ways to go all the way over here, all the way back. Now it's just boom, right there for you. So for those of you who jump in and out of the menu, quick little tip for you. All right, so custom controls, you're going to want to get in and really play with these on your camera. Next up, we have our picture styles. And so this is the recipe, the formula, the way your images are going to look in JPEG or with RAW. It's how they're going to look in the camera itself, in the viewfinder, and on the monitor of the back of the camera. You can go in and choose some different picture styles with different saturation and contrast levels. You can also even go in and adjust the sharpness and clarity and some other issues on it. So a quick example, this is a relatively subtle difference between some of these, at least on camera. They'll be a little bit more noticeable in person. And so they are adjusting, as I say, contrast, saturation, exact color tone in some cases. The one that is most notably different is monochrome. So if you want to shoot black and white, this is a great system for doing it. I love shooting black and white in a mirrorless camera because when you put the camera in the monochrome mode and while the camera is still in RAW, you get to see the world in black and white. Both the screens, the viewfinder and the LCD, are in black and white. When you shoot RAW, you collect all the color information and then you can work with that color information after the fact. And that way you get the best of both worlds. You get it in black and white and you get it in color. Now, if you shoot black and white, or if you shoot black and white in JPEG, it is going to be baked in and you can't get color back out of it. You could hand color it if you want to. It might take some time. And so you want to be very careful about shooting black and white with JPEG. All right, so those are your picture styles. Next up, we've already talked about auto white balance and white balance, but you can come in here and you can adjust it. And so if you don't want to have that feature, which is currently part of the multifunction button on the top of the camera, you will always be able to access it here very easily. White balance shift. Now, I don't think most people are going to need this. This is something that if your white balance isn't quite right, let's just say you have it set to tungsten lights, but in fact, there are different types of tungsten lights that have different color. You could come in here and adjust it. You could also adjust it if the whole camera seems to be drifting in color. And as I say, hopefully you won't need it for that. And so you can do a bracketing with white balance, which is completely unnecessary with RAW because you have complete control later on. If you are shooting with JPEGs, I suppose you could do it, and it's there for some people. It's just not something that most people are going to really need. All right, next up is the Auto Lightning Optimizer. And this is one of the areas where the camera will shoot in the JPEG mode and adjust the shadows and the highlights to try to capture a bit more tonal information. Has no effect if you're shooting RAW. And so the idea here is that a lot of photos have shadows that has information that you would like to see, and by turning on the Auto Lightning Optimizer, you can see more into the shadows than you would otherwise. And while that is a true statement for some photos, not all photos do we need to lighten up the shadows on. In some cases, we do want distinct and dark shadows, and it really changes from subject to subject. So be careful about setting this to a particular setting and then leaving it there all the time. Now, once again, this is for JPEG only, has no effect on RAW images. The camera can hook up using a Wi-Fi system to a phone and other devices. We'll talk about this more in the network menu section of the class. All right, a few items that we have talked about before. We can choose our focusing area here. There is a button on the back of the camera for choosing this, but we can reprogram it. If so, we can access it here in the quick menu. One-shot focusing is another important option that is in the multifunction collection currently, but if you reprogram it, it's here in the quick menu. As I say, most everything important is in the quick menu. Metering modes, we talked about this back in exposure controls. The multi-segment metering is going to be best for most people most of the time. Our drive controls can also be controlled here. Another one of those items that is part of the multifunction setup. And so with all the reprogramming, you can always be safe and finding it here in the quick menu. The record function card selection allows you to select exactly what happens with the different cards that you have in the camera. So is it just filling up one card? Is it being backed up by another card? You can go in here and adjust what's being saved and how. And we'll talk more about this when we get into the setup menu in the camera. Then the image quality. We talked about this at the beginning of the class, and this is very important where you get to choose whether you're shooting RAW or JPEG, or you can shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time. It's just a matter of what dials you use on the camera to select these in. As I've said most of the time, you're going to want to shoot RAW if you want the highest quality images. I have found that the compact RAW is as good as the RAW in every situation that I've been able to test it out. There are some people who theorize that the RAW will have more information. I have yet to have anyone show me a lot of proof that really says that it's better, but there is the possibility that it does. Choose the appropriate size JPEGs if you are shooting JPEGs. And so this is one of the most important settings that you want to get right on the camera. So kind of keep an eye to make sure that this is exactly where you want it. Down along the bottom of the frame, you'll see some more general information about various features that are turned on or off, or how much recording time is left for video. Now this is the quick menu in the still section of the camera. When you change it over to the movie mode, you're going to get a different menu, and we're going to talk more about movies in another section, but we are talking about the quick menu, so let's talk about the things that are different when you are shooting in the movie mode. You'll have a quick access to the audio recording, so you can adjust recording levels from automatic to manual and setting those levels. There is an attenuator which allows you to turn this on so that it suppresses loud noises, so that it kind of keeps everything within the range that the camera can record with sound. If you have a lot of wind, you can turn on a wind filter. It's going to help out a little bit, not a lot. Once again, built-in microphones are generally in the terrible category, and this might improve it by a couple of percent. So yeah, it can be helpful. Movie Digital IS is where the camera will crop in on the image and give you a more stabilized view. So this will be at the expense of your angle of view. It may still keep the resolution that you want, but is something that might be handy when you're walking with the camera if you do not have another gimbal device. Something you want to test to see if it works for your type of work in movie shooting. And then finally, you can adjust your movie recording size parameters. We'll talk about this in much more detail in the movie shooting section, and we'll see it again in the movie shooting menu as well. All right, so two different quick menus depending on what mode you're in. Remember, you can always hit up this with the Q button. Q button is not something that can be reprogrammed, so it's kind of an easy, safe way to go back and finding those most important controls.